Assalamu alaikum. Inshallah, it's nice to see so many participants here. We are a couple minutes late, and so I'm going to shorten my initial talk so that we have as much time as possible for questions and then for discussions. And in the questions, I'll try to give a very quick answer so that we can get to as many questions as possible. If you have a piece of paper in front of you, then feel free while I'm talking to write down your questions. We can collect them, and inshallah, we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. The topic that we want to look at is the question of how to develop an Islamic identity and strengthen and keep an Islamic identity in a society where an Islamic identity doesn't come naturally. So if you live in a Muslim country, then it's very... Assalamu alaikum. If you live in a Muslim country, then it's very easy to develop a Muslim identity because it's part of your life. When people get married, then they naturally have a Muslim nikah. When they have any kind of life event, then it is done in accordance with Muslim tradition and Muslim culture. Not necessarily because the person is a very strong believer, not necessarily because the person made a choice, but because Islam is just part of their culture and their family and their life. So people will say something like, Insha'Allah, but what they really mean is hopefully. They're not really thinking of Allah, and if Allah wills, then something takes place. Or they'll say, MashaAllah, but they're not really thinking that Allah is the most perfect creator, and therefore something that I see which is beautiful or admirable, it comes from Allah. They're saying the word Allah, but they're not remembering Allah, because that's just part of their culture. Just like in English, sometimes people will say, God bless you, when somebody sneezes. But are they thinking of God? And are they thinking of blessings? Or is it just a sentence that people say? This is how, for many people, for many Muslims, Islam is just part of their culture, without thinking about it. That's a good thing. It's a good foundation to build a Muslim identity, but it's not enough. It's a good thing because when you hear the name of Allah, it can serve as a reminder that we belong to Allah and we have a responsibility to Allah. But it's not a substitute for choosing to be Muslim. So how can you construct an Islamic identity? There's two stages. Number one, we have to remember that our identity is a choice that we make. It's not automatic. It's not given to you. You choose how you want to identify. So sometimes people think that, I feel a certain way, and therefore that becomes my identity because of how I feel. And it's not something that I have control over. Sometimes people will say, for example, in America, that you don't have a control over your orientation, or you don't have a control over your feelings and your identity. And Islam teaches us that we do have control over who we identify with and which feelings we give importance to and we strengthen, and which feelings we direct in a different way or in a specific way. That is a matter of our willpower and our control. And if I think that something is right, I don't have a feeling for it. Then I have to figure out how can I strengthen that feeling. But the first stage is to recognize that you have a control over who you identify with and what your personality is defined as. It's not given to you. It's not something that you don't have a choice over. You don't choose where you were born. You don't choose the color of your skin. You don't choose your physical features. That's given to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you can choose to accept or reject a certain identity. The second stage, once you recognize that you have agency, you have choice. The second stage is to recognize that it's not just a matter of free will. All choices are not equal. So let's say that you are somebody, for example, who has a lot of talent in a particular field. Right? If you have talent in sports, if you have a talent in a certain academic field, if you can choose a career, all careers are not equal. Let's say you have a really beautiful voice. A person can choose a haram career with a beautiful voice. They can choose a halal career with a beautiful voice. They can recite Quran, they can recite nasheed, they can recite noha, they can sing. They can sing wholesome and good songs, or they can sing songs that are damaging to people's morality and spirituality. That's a choice. All choices are not equal. And so in Islam, what we are taught is that we have a certain perfection that we can work towards as a human being. Any choice that I make, when I make my identity, that brings me closer to that ideal is a better choice than a decision that takes me further away from that ideal. So the first stage is to recognize that you have agency, meaning you can choose what your identity is. You're not compelled, it's not forced for you. And when you can choose, then you have to try to choose the very best ideals and identity to say that you want to live up to them. That these are my principles. And if I want to summarize that, I'll say the difference between a Western conception and an Islamic conception is summarized with two words. Right? Two words to define a Western conception of identity, two words to identify or define an Islamic conception. The Western conception of identity is expression and expansion. Right? So I express myself, and then I expand from where I am to try to succeed professionally, to succeed or grow in whatever area I'm interested in. I want to be the best artist or the best athlete or the best person in my career, or I want to get famous. I express myself and I expand from within. A non-Islamic conception, express yourself and expand. And you might get frustrated. Maybe you think, my parents don't understand me. I'm trying to express myself and my parents don't understand how I feel. Or they don't respect my individuality. Right? Why do people have that feeling about their parents? Because they're trying to express themselves, and maybe you comb your hair the wrong way, or you want to get colored contacts, and your mom says, no, absolutely not. You're not wearing that. You're not getting a tattoo. You're not getting your nose pierced, or whatever people want to express themselves individually, and maybe their parents don't agree, don't understand it, don't respect it. So what is our Islamic conception? Our Islamic conception, rather than express and expand from within, it is instruction and ascension. Instruction means that Allah has given us a certain nobility by making us people. We have a lot of creativity, a lot of ability to think, imagine, create as human beings. You can be a poor person in the middle of a jungle, and you can create an entire imaginary world and poetry and art that no other animal, no other being can create. So Allah has put that within us, and He's instructed us for the purpose of our life. I might not want to get married, but if marriage is how Allah has allowed us to express the highest ideals of humanity, then I have to learn from Allah what is my humanity and how can I live up to my potential? And then once we have been instructed, I'm not just expanding, but I'm ascending. Do you guys know what ascending means? Ascending means you're going up. And so you're trying to live as a human being, but you want to gradually live at a higher and higher level so you come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So once again, the contrast. In the West, in a non-Islamic environment, expression and expansion. I want to express how I feel, how I think, what's going on in my mind, and then I want to dress and I want to show myself just as an expression of my feelings. They might change from day to day or from year to year. And then I want to expand from within. But Islam gives us a slightly different perspective, which is that first you want to get instruction from Allah. What is the best way to express yourself? That's not just how you feel, but that represents who you really are. And who you really are is what Allah has created you to be. The potential. The soul that Allah has given you that's meant to live forever. You get that instruction from Allah. Then you express it, not just as an expression of your feelings, but as an expression of that potential. And your goal is not just to expand, but your goal is to ascend, to go up and then come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the final point that I'll make. In Islam, if you have that goal that you want to see, where has God put you? What has He created you to do? And then you want to ascend towards Him, right? Then the further you go in life, the more rewarding your life will be. So in America, you know how people say you're only young once? Right? Ideal is when you're young, and when you're strong, and when you're healthy, and when you're beautiful. That's the best time of your life. In the Western conception, the best time of your life is when you're young, strong, carefree, no family, no responsibility. That's your ideal. The longer you go in life, then you have a crisis. Oh my God, I'm getting old. Oh my God, I'm getting wrinkled. Oh my God, my hair is turning white. The longer you go, the worse things become. And then people get plastic surgery because they want to look young again. The Islamic conception, though, it gives us something much more rewarding. Because you're not trying to just express yourself as you are, you're trying to build towards something. So the further you go in life, the more rewarding it becomes. Because you're moving purposefully in a direction. So right now, most of you are very young, right? You're building to something that's greater than just being young. So when you get older, you're not depressed. Oh my God, I'm not young anymore. Oh my God, I'm getting married. I don't have my freedom anymore. Oh my God, I'm not as good looking or as strong as I was when I'm younger. Right? As you get older, you get more happy. You get more tranquil. You get more satisfied because you're coming closer to your goal. So in Islam, white hair is not something that you're scared of. Right? You're not just saying you only are young once, but you're thinking, I only live my entire life once, so I want to make my life be meaningful and be purposeful. And when you come from high school to college, and then college to starting to work, and you get older, then you are happy to try to become more responsible. Maybe you're looking forward to the next stage in your life and the responsibilities that come with that next stage, because it gets better as your life moves forward. Even if you start to get weaker, you get more busy, right? Because you're moving forward in your goal. So once again, to summarize, in the West, we have a culture of expression and expansion. What do you feel? You want to talk and say what you're feeling. and then you expand from within. But in Islam, we believe that we get instruction from God. He tells us what our created purpose is, our potential is. That instruction comes from the Prophet, it comes from Ahlul Bayt, it comes from the Quran, it comes from our own heart as well. But then, we don't just expand, we ascend. We come closer to Allah through that purpose. We construct our identity, you have the choice. But we don't just choose whatever we want, we choose the best option out of all of the possibilities that we have. That is how an Islamic identity is different from a secular or a non-Islamic identity. And that is why a Muslim has to live his or her life differently than a non-Muslim. Right? So, if you watch movies, if you go to school, if you read fiction, then recognize that all of that comes with certain culture, certain values. And our values are very different. I'm not saying you can't watch any movies or you can't read fiction, but be aware of that difference. And don't start thinking or acting like somebody who has no value system or a very different value system that might be damaging to their soul and to their humanity. You can experience those things and be part of those, society, but live according to your own value system and your own purpose, inshallah. So that'll conclude my introductory remarks. And inshallah, we can begin with questions and discussion from the community. So the other mic is right here. Everybody ready to join?
So I don't know if you guys can hear me. Oh, the mic started working. Okay. So I'm going to try and read the questions as they are on the card. I may slightly change the word slightly just to make it concise and understandable. So I'm sorry if I misrepresent your questions. But I got the first question that I've picked up here is, it's a two-part question, and the first part is, does everything truly happen for a reason in Islam? And are there any things we can do in Islam to relieve our stress?
All right. Two good questions. Does everything happen for a reason? Yes. In Islam, nothing is a coincidence. There's no such thing as a coincidence. Everything happens for a reason, but that reason does depend on your actions. So it's not that everything is decided by Allah and you have no control. You have control, and if you make good decisions, then Allah will give you one result. If you make bad decisions, then Allah will give you a different result. But both of them are not a coincidence. They're because you did certain things, you made certain decisions, and then that was the best outcome that Allah gave based on those decisions. So everything has a purpose and a reason, but you have control over what outcome God gives you based on your actions. How do you relieve stress? The biggest relief of stress is to recognize that Allah is taking care of us. So the biggest source of happiness is that nothing happens without Allah allowing it to happen. Right? Imam Hasan said that in Karbala, "Hawwana bi ma nazala bi annahu bi'aynillah." That even in Karbala, right, the worst, most stressful, painful event in history, Imam Hussein said, "I know that Allah is watching. And if He didn't want this to happen, if this wasn't good for Islam, then Allah wouldn't have let it happen." So the biggest source of relief that we have is that Allah is watching, which means I have to put my most sincere effort. If I don't get the outcome that I wanted, then there must have been something better for me in the other outcome. But there are other ways as well. One way that we can relieve stress, aside from just trusting in Allah, is that if you give your greatest thought to how you can serve Allah. Right? Don't stress too much about passing a test. Because why do you want to pass a test? Maybe you want to get into a special college, or you want to impress your family, or you want to qualify for a scholarship. Well, if you think your goal is to get into that program, then you'll be stressed about it. But if I say my goal is to serve Allah, and I'm going to put my best effort, all my effort, and then if I don't get into that program, I don't get that scholarship, then I'll trust Allah will take care of me in some other way. That relieves you from having that stress. So think about what is the goal, which is to serve Allah, and not the process, which is the smaller goals that we have for ourselves.
Okay, so the next question that we have is about zakat and khums. If you could briefly go over the difference between the two, and also with giving zakat in America, we don't come across poor people as much. So how do we give zakat in America?
Good question. So very briefly, zakat and khums are two types of responsibilities we have in Islam. Zakat is partially a tax on wealth, and khums is a tax on income. So when you earn money, you spend whatever you need for your needs. What's left over, you give 20% in the path of Allah. Basically what Allah tells us is that He's guaranteed He'll take care of you. Anytime you have savings, then you should be ready to give all of it to Allah. Because we shouldn't demand more than we need. But Allah says, even the extra that I give you, you can keep 80%. Give 20% in my path. That's from income. Zakat is wealth. Let's say I have wealth that I have from year to year. So every year I'll give a smaller percentage of that to the path of Allah. Zakat is only for a small number of assets. Not all your wealth do you have to pay zakat for. And because it's limited, most people in America don't have that kind of wealth of like animals or agriculture or gold or silver. So you're not liable for zakat. But in principle, it's good to give a portion of our wealth every year, even if it's not required. And there are poor people everywhere. Islam tells us that when it comes to your religious taxes, give it first and foremost to those people who are pious, religious, knowledgeable, scholars who might be in need. Give your charity to those who are most deserving because they're poor and because they're good Muslims and they're good people. That way you're helping relieve poverty, but you're also reinforcing good values. So give that priority, and if you look, you'll always find people who are able to use a helping hand. Thank you.
This plug, oh, it's working again. We've been handing out flyers here for a food drive that we are doing. It is going to Faith, which is a Muslim charity that has a food pantry in Herndon. There will be boxes both here in the gents and ladies. We're doing the food drive until Chelum, so please bring in staples like rice, oil, pasta, canned goods, stuff that doesn't, not fresh food basically, because it's going to go in the pantry. And they help feed needy Muslim families in Herndon area. So I'm gonna, the next question, if you can just wait with me, I'm trying to summarize 3 questions just because of time. It goes on about being a good Muslim. It starts off with, you know, we're all lovers of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and we all are grateful Shias, but we are guilty of being weak in practice when it comes to salah, and for women hijab, well, actually for everybody hijab, right? What are people like us to do when we have weak faith? Are we supposed to wait until we get the call to go to ziyarah and go there and ask to strengthen our faith? And I am paraphrasing here. Also, sorry, I know I'm kind of rambling here, but I'm trying to get all the questions across. Also, on that same topic, if somebody says something bad about Islam to us and we don't have the necessary knowledge or the necessary words to prove that they're wrong, what should we say? And again, with Muharram being the topic here, what do we do when we get invited in Muharram and Safar to a friend's wedding? I mean, how do we politely decline, or is it okay for us to attend? how do we handle those kind of situations?
Good. So I'll go backwards. In Muharram and Safar, what do you do if you get invited to a happy occasion? The most important thing is Ashura, the day, 10th of Muharram. If you can avoid any kind of school work on Ashura, unless it's like an emergency, you have, for example, a test that you cannot reschedule in school, you're on call, if you're working, for example, you cannot get out, then always try on Ashura to get out of school, get out of work, and be with a Muslim community. Then after that, in importance, is the first 10 days of Muharram. Try to attend a majlis, even if you have to skip your sports or your other activities. Go to school, do your other activities, but try to attend the first 10 days. Outside of that, then for yourself, remember the month of Muharram is a month of mourning. Don't schedule a birthday party. Don't schedule a celebration with you, for yourself, your family, your friends. But if you have non-Muslim friends, if you have non-Shia friends, then you can be courteous and you can be friendly with them. You can attend their party, or you can send them a gift, depending on what the occasion is. But don't celebrate during those times. You can attend briefly and then come out. So during the month of Muharram, it's not an Islamic requirement, but it's part of our love for Ahlul Bayt that we don't show ourselves to be celebrating. And if you keep that priority, then it'll be easier to do. Second question was, what if somebody says something bad about Islam? Don't feel the need to respond. Remember, sometimes a response is good. Sometimes silence is the best response. The Quran says, وَإِذَا مَرُّوا بِاللَّغْوِ مَرُّوا كِرَامًا وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. That believers, when they pass by people who are wasting their time or talking nonsense, they don't respond, yell at them, insult them, or join them. They pass by with nobility, with dignity. And when people who are ignorant talk to them, they say peace. So don't yell back. Don't get into a fight for no reason. If somebody has a question, then in a dignified way, respond. If you don't know what the response is, nothing comes to your mind, then keep your dignity, because you don't want to stoop to somebody else's level. If somebody has a real question, then try to answer that question. Right? And help them remove their ignorance. So that's the second question. The first question was about what if you have a weak identity? A lot of people have that misconception that if you have a weak identity, then you shouldn't practice. So they say, for example, I don't feel very spiritual, so I'm not going to pray today. Or I don't feel very spiritual, so I'm not going to go to the masjid today. Remember, in Islam, we're not just expressing ourselves, but we're trying to train ourselves to express ourselves right. So I might be really angry at somebody, but because that person is older than I am, because that person is my parent, even if I'm feeling one way, I'll express myself in a different way. So that gradually I can learn to even feel differently than I used to feel. I control my emotions and my angers. So if you're not feeling very religious, then try to practice religion better. And if you gradually practice, then it helps you develop that feeling. And the way to do that is two ways. Some things are wajib, so do them fully even if you don't feel it. You don't feel like praying, you're tired, you're busy, you're really interested in something else that's going on. If it's wajib, make yourself do it, regardless of how you feel. That's your baseline, right? If something is not wajib, but it's a good thing, then try to do it whenever you have a little bit of feeling. And try to gradually build. So you can be flexible. But make sure that you're not ignoring something that's good or recommended, but you're doing it as you feel that you have that space within your heart. Try to push yourself a little bit. Read a little bit more about Islam, right? Attend the masjid a little bit more than you did in the past. Gradually, you build your ability. But somebody who doesn't feel very pious, if they say that, well, I'm not going to do it until I feel it, then the feeling is never going to come automatically. You have to build it. You have to develop it. Being around other Muslims, being in a space that is a healthy space like a masjid, that helps us develop that feeling. Doing what is wajib, what's required of us, helps us build that feeling. So remember, your feelings will affect your actions, but your actions will also affect your feelings. It works both ways. And whichever one of those is weak, then you can use the other to help strengthen the part that is weak.
Okay, so to follow on from that, again, I'm just consolidating a couple of questions here. It's more, this is about Muharram and Safar. We're getting questions like about watching TV during that time and laughing at jokes and shows, as well as traveling in Safar. I mean, there's a lot of things like Safar mein safar nahi karte hai, and for those who don't understand Urdu, that means in the month of Safar, you don't travel. Safar is the Urdu word for travel. Also, it's the whole culture part of it, that as a Shia community, we commemorate Muharram Safar for the whole 2 months and 10 days, versus other Shias do it just the 10 days of Muharram, or they end at like 10 days of Muharram and Chelum, or just the 10 days of Muharram. So again, how do we...
Very good question. The general principle here is that the point of certain teachings in Islam is not a specific way to do things, it's a value system. Some Islamic teachings are specific, right? Like fasting in the month of Ramadan is a specific teaching. You do it the way God said. When God said to fast and how God said to fast. You can't add something. You can't say, I'm traveling but I feel like fasting, so I'll tough it out. I'm sick but I'll still fast, so I'll tough it out. That's not up to you, it's however God said. But some things Islam said, they're general principles. Like Islam said, respect your parents. Well, in India, maybe most parents don't care about Mother's Day and Father's Day. So respecting your parents doesn't mean that you send them a card or you give them a phone call on Mother's Day. But in America, for a lot of parents, that's a meaningful holiday. And so you respect them maybe by sending them roses. You would respect them maybe by giving them a phone call or sending them a card. That's different in different cultures. Islam says your parents should feel respected. That depends a little bit on their culture and on your culture. There's not a specific way to do that. That depends partially on what language and what culture you belong to. Does that make sense? It's different. What is the thing about Muharram? It's not specific teachings. It's you want to show respect to Imam Hussein. So in different cultures, that's done differently. But anything that you do, it should be respectful to Imam Hussein and to the remembrance of Karbala. Is it haram to watch TV? No. Is it haram to joke? No. But for example, on Ashura, you shouldn't do any of that. During the first 10 days of Muharram, you can talk, you can even tell a joke, but you shouldn't, be sitting for, say, a half hour with your friends just telling jokes to each other and laughing, because it's a time of mourning. So you can, you meet a friend, you talk to them happily, you smile, you laugh, that's fine. But remember, it's a time of mourning. Excessive joking is going to be disrespectful. Watching TV as well, at certain times during Muharram and maybe even during Safar, it might be disrespectful. But it's not haram by itself. So the goal is you want to live your life, especially during Muharram and Safar, showing respect to Imam Hussein. The specific, that depends on your culture and the circumstances. Right? So, for example, wearing bright red clothes is not haram by itself, but if it's going to be disrespectful, then you should avoid it. Right? Similarly with where you go, entertainment, and other decisions. The principle is what you should remember. Don't get lost in the details. Muharram is like respecting your parents. That principle is important. And if your parents are being disrespected, you can't say, but I got you a gift last year. Right? That's not the answer. The answer is that they should feel respected. Similarly for Imam Hussein, you can't say, I went to a majlis, so now I'm going to watch a movie. Right? You want to respect Imam Hussein and show your love for him throughout those times.
So everybody's Mother's Day gift last year and Father's Day's gift didn't cut it.
It's not enough.
It's not enough. Okay. The next question I'm going to ask is a bit sensitive, so I'm just giving a warning. But it's a very prevalent topic that keeps on coming up in Islamic forums and across communities, Shia and Sunni communities and the communities all over the world. Kids these days obviously go to school here. They have a number of friends, and we've had very recent movements of the LGBT rights being granted and the legalizing gay marriages and stuff. So it's in the news everywhere, and amongst other things. So what does Islam say about that? And on the same thing, talking about being homosexual, we find that science teaches kids and adults as well that it's not a choice, it's that you are born that way. And if you are born that way, how do we then turn around and say, well, in Islam it's a sin, right? A lot of times, the phrase, you're going to go to hell for that. You hear the Dutch Prime Minister and stuff saying, well, according to Islam, I'm worse than a pig and stuff like that. How do you explain to your kids that what is about being gay in Islam, essentially?
So a couple things are part of culture that don't necessarily have any reality, right? Like, for example, in America, race, right? All of us know what race is, right? Right? We know who is black, who is white, but those are not real things. If you go to other countries, they don't define race the same way as they do in America. Some cultures, they see color very differently, right? The reason why this is something that you and I understand, so-and-so is African American, so-and-so is white American, so-and-so is Italian American, it's because of how they define themselves and how they identify. Somebody might have grown up in an Italian neighborhood with only one Italian parent and one non-Italian parent, and they consider themselves Italian American. But another person with one Italian parent doesn't consider themselves Italian American, they consider themselves Irish American with their other parent, or just general, a white person. Right? These are social decisions. They're not real scientifically. What Islam tells us is that there's no such thing as an identity based on your sexual orientation, your orientation. Right? All there is that Allah has created people with different tests and different temptations. Right? So, for example, some of you are competitive, right? If you see a game, you really want to compete and win. And then some people, they're not competitive. Like somebody's trying to, dare you to do something, and you couldn't care less. Some people, they see people gambling, and they want to guess and win that game. And for other people, they have no interest in gambling. Now, we don't say, well, I'm a gambling identity. You're a non-gambling identity. That's just a different test that somebody has. Drugs, drinking, dancing, gambling, any kind of bad habit. Some people are tempted one way, some people are tempted a different way. What we believe as Muslims is everybody's tested. Everybody's tempted. Your test might be different than mine. Right? I might be really smart, and so my test is to be arrogant about how intelligent I am. And I talk down and I insult people and call them stupid. Somebody else might not be really smart, book smart. They might be really good in athletics. And their test might be that they go around bullying people and punching people because their test is their strength. And somebody else has a different test. None of that is an identity. So in Islam, what we believe is that there is no identity that's based on what test God has given you. Your test is your test, my test is my test, but Allah has given all of us the willpower to overcome our test. Somebody's tempted to be violent, but Allah doesn't make you be violent. Somebody's tempted to sin in a different way, but nobody's forced. Now, what about people who are part of LGBT groups? What is our response? As a Muslim, you don't insult anybody, you don't look down on anybody, don't tell anybody they're going to hell, and don't tell anybody they're worse than a pig, because that's not our job. That's Allah's job to decide. Maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. Maybe that person is better than I think they are. If anybody asks, what we say is that we believe as Muslims that Allah has given us a roadmap. Whatever our tests are, this is how we're supposed to live our lives. Right? Some of you see a bacon breakfast, and you really want to taste that bacon because you've heard it's tasty. And some of you see that bacon breakfast and you want to throw up because what could be more disgusting than seeing a pig, right? Different tests. But none of us are defined by that test. So we will tell somebody that we believe Allah has given us a roadmap. I don't eat bacon because God said. Maybe I want to, maybe I don't even want to. But we're not judging, we're not insulting, and we're not looking down on anybody else. And if they're not a Muslim, we're not telling them you should not be gay. We're telling them, why don't you look into Islam and see if you accept that roadmap. If you accept that roadmap, then you follow that roadmap. But that's the choice. Do you follow the roadmap that God gave you in the Quran and through Ahlul Bayt, or do you not follow that roadmap? Otherwise, we don't insult or look down on anybody. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very nice answer to that question. So to lighten up the topic a little bit more, so recently there's been a movement in order to be green to have lab meat, I guess is the best way to put it, where meat is grown in a lab versus cows and chickens and so forth. And they estimate in the next 50 years, that's where most of our meat is going to come from, especially in the West. How do halal and haram rules apply to that? If my bacon comes from a lab, can I eat it?
Yeah. So this is something that's kind of on the cutting edge of new development, and some fuqaha have addressed it, and there are opinions on both sides. Some fuqaha have said that with lab meat, if it's not a living organism, it does not need to be slaughtered, and that would be permissible to eat. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that a lot of that lab meat, it's grown, in a laboratory, right? And therefore, it's fed. Its food might be taken from blood or from a najis source. So if it's become najis, then it's not just a question of slaughtering, it's a question of is it tahir or not, is it impure? That might be something which would make it impermissible. But some of our fuqaha have addressed that and have said that lab-grown meat would be permissible if it's not part of a living organism. It doesn't need to be slaughtered separately. It doesn't have the vessels and the blood in the same way. If it is taken from a pig, or if it will be pork, then that meat would be impermissible regardless of how it's grown. But there are other fuqaha who say that you should do precaution, and that would be a matter of individual taqleed.
Sanitizers have alcohol in them, so is it permissible to use a hand sanitizer?
That's also a matter of taqleed. There's three main opinions in the Shia world. One opinion is that alcohol is najis. One opinion is that alcohol that is industrial is not najis. Alcohol that is used for food, like wine, or, for example, spirits, is najis. The third opinion is that alcohol is not najis. The most common opinion, I would say, among Shia fuqaha right now is that wine, beer, and alcohol that is consumed is najis. But that, say, rubbing alcohol, or the alcohol that you find in cologne, or the alcohol that you find in your gasoline, ethanol, right? There's a 10%, sometimes 15% ethanol, that's not najis. But there are different opinions. So the opinion that you can follow, Sayyid Sistani's opinion, is this way. Sheikh Makarim Shirazi and many other fuqaha also have a similar opinion, with some minor differences, I'm simplifying, is that if it's wine or beer, it's najis. You can't drink it, but it's also najis if it comes on your clothing. You can't pray, for example. So that, there's certain foods that are cooked with wine, right? If you put the wine in the food, even if it evaporates, then it's najis, because the food is impure. But if it's industrial alcohol, ethanol, for example, or for commercial use, it's not najis. But the other two opinions do exist.
Okay, moving back to a more of a cultural-based insight on culture-based thing. We've got a few questions here about clarifying some of the rituals that have been done by our forefathers but aren't valid today. We've also got questions about fulfilling the stipulation of a mannat. How much of that do you have if it was set forth by you by a parent? And also, how do we explain the concept of nazar and the religious concept to kids today?
So, by nazar you mean mannat, or you mean nazar ibad, for example, the evil eye?
I think it's we've got both. So if you can.
Sure. So there is a concept that people sometimes have that, like, your parents make an intention, for example, that if I have a child, then I'm going to have that child fulfill a certain religious responsibility. In Islam, you can only make a vow for yourself. So I cannot say that I'm going to make my parents do something, or I'm going to make my children do something, or my wife, or my husband, or my brother, or my sister. Right? If I get cured from my sickness, my sister is going to read the whole Quran. Right? I can't do that. Parents can't do that either. Now, if your parents made that intention, then it's not a legal obligation in Islam for you to fulfill it, but it is an ethical obligation to try to fulfill the wishes of your parents to the extent possible. Imam Zayn al-Abidin, in his dua for his parents, he says, Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That, oh Allah, make me the kind of person that when my parents want something and I want something, what they want comes first, and what I want comes second. Right? That's what the Imam prayed for. That even if I want something, I first think, what do my parents want? I do that. Then I do what I want. So that's ethically and morally what you should try to do. But that's not a legal requirement. I can only make a vow and make a promise to God for myself. Right? You can't do it on behalf of somebody else. Second question then was about the concept of nazar. A lot of people have a question that, does the evil eye exist? Right? Does this exist or not? And people think it's superstitious. Islam is not superstitious. In Islam, superstition, right, like a lucky rabbit's foot or a lucky clover, or the 13th being bad luck, or walking under a ladder being bad luck, that's not allowed. Superstition is not allowed in Islam. But the evil eye is not about superstition. The evil eye is a recognition that there are things that exist that go beyond the physical world, right? Just like if you went 500 years ago and you told somebody that when somebody coughs or sneezes, you might get sick, they would say, that's superstition. Why would I get sick if somebody coughs? Thank you. Right? Thank you. That's fine. Thank you. That's superstition. But now we know that germs exist and certain diseases are contagious. Right? People didn't know that in many cultures, even 500 years ago, even 300 years ago. Similarly, today people don't believe in a spiritual world. But we do believe in a spiritual world. If I'm an evil person, then it's kind of like germs. Right? If I'm drinking here alcohol, God forbid, you might say, well, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to suffer. No, my evil actions, they infect that land. So you should try to be as far away from me as possible when I'm doing evil. Or if you have to come close to me for some reason, then you recognize, right, just like if you go to a hospital, there's a lot of germs there. What do you do when you come home? You know that you've been in a bad place or a place that has a lot of germs, so you want to change, wash your clothes, take a shower, maybe you'll disinfect yourself. Right? You recognize that that's something that you have to do. Similarly, if you're in a place that's spiritually infected, sometimes you have to go there. But don't just think that it's all the same, it's all healthy. Go and get yourself washed. Right? And how do you wash yourself from spiritual germs? Right? Well, you can do ghusl is good, especially for tawbah. You also do zikr, right? You come to a masjid, you come to a wholesome place, a healthy place, right? You go around good people, pious people. So when I'm with a good person, I'm getting the benefit of their spiritual well-being. If I'm near a bad person, I'm getting the harm of their spiritual evil. So that's not superstition. That's real. And just like people who didn't know about science, they didn't know about germs, people who don't know about religion, they don't understand that concept. The evil eye is just the idea that when people are jealous, when people are filled with evil in their hearts, then their presence is also a harmful presence. And you just protect yourself by giving sadaqah, by remembering God. Right? Those things give us protection. Just like vitamins and antibiotics can help give us protection against physical illness. Right? That's the concept of nazar. Right? That answers the question?
Okay. I think another one was about the ritual parts of what we've adopted from our forefathers. I mean, similar to like the whole how long we do Muharram and stuff before.
So when it comes to rituals, a lot of people think that culture is bad and religion is good. You cannot have religion without culture. Every religion is going to become part of your culture. Respect your culture. But always try to measure your culture against religious standards. So let me give you an example. Right? A lot of people, they don't say, God bless you anymore. Right? Because it's a religious phrase. Or when something sad happens, people in America used to say, I'm praying for you. Nowadays, a lot of people say, I'm sending good thoughts in your direction. They don't say prayer anymore. Those are cultural expressions. It's a good culture to remember God. It's a bad culture to say, may the force be with you, rather than may God be with you. That's not a good culture. So every religion is going to express itself through culture. But we have to always try to improve our culture, measure our culture against our religious standards. But for example, any Muslim language, Farsi, Turkish, Urdu, Arabic, its literature has been influenced by Islamic poets, Islamic thinkers, Muslims. And that's a very rich literature. Right? In English, when you'd have literature, a lot of it is polytheistic. Right? They say, the gods are angry, that's why it's stormy. There's no gods. That culture has come from a bad place and it's adopted a bad idiom. So we're always trying to reform our culture, but there are many parts of English culture and American culture that are good, that are part of Islam. And we want to respect that and adopt that. So dress, meaning clothing, foods, ways of interacting, respect your culture, but measure your culture against an Islamic standard. And if the culture has something that's not good in Islam, then abandon it. If it has something that's good in Islam, then keep it and improve it. So some parts of the culture of our parents, it may be something that we want to improve, and some parts we want to keep, and maybe some parts we need to abandon.
So following on to that, the question is that how do we explain the evils of the West to our children without sounding like cynics? And also with that, being a parent of young kids or older kids, how do you explain to them that, you know, they're American, right? A lot of us were born in the East and then moved to America, but our kids are born here, raised here. Their culture is American culture. I remember a few years back it was explained to me that we're pilau people and our kids are pizza people, right? How do you make that compromise as a parent and as a child, right? How do you, it goes both ways because compromise is both ways.
Well, Ahlul Bayt were very, very careful never to let Muslims look down on non-Muslim culture or practices. So there were times, you know, when people would come, non-Muslims would come to Muslim lands, and some of the companions of the imams, because, you know, people are prejudiced. Even in this country, some people are prejudiced against immigrants or against Muslims. Similarly, there were Muslims who were prejudiced against non-Muslims, and they would sometimes make fun of the people who came. And the imams were very strict about that. They did not let their companions make fun of non-Muslims because they were from a different culture or a different religion. Yes, you can debate, you can discuss, you can explain why you think Islam is right and their religion is wrong, but you cannot mock them or their marriage or their children or their culture because it's different. And we should have that same perspective with regard to parts of American culture. Their food is not un-Islamic, their language is not un-Islamic, even their holidays are not un-Islamic, right? But we have to measure it against Islam. So for example, Thanksgiving is an Islamic holiday because every day is Thanksgiving. And if they want to celebrate it in particular in November, great. Mother's Day and Father's Day, we don't have that same philosophy that there's only one day for our mother. There's nothing un-Islamic about it. But Halloween, right, is a holiday dedicated to evil spirits and the effect of those evil spirits in our time. There's a lot of bad habits and bad practices associated with Halloween parties. If you like to dress up, if you like to be creative, there's nothing wrong with that in Islam. But those evil parts of that holiday you should also recognize, and you should stay away from them. So don't demonize any culture, any non-Islamic culture. They also are people who are created by God, and they have a human fitrah, and 80% of religion is fitrah. Only 20% of Islam is outside of your fitrah. Right? If you didn't have Islam, you wouldn't know how to pray. But do you need the Quran to tell you to brush your teeth? You just need your mom to yell at you, right?
I was just about to say that. Exactly. Not the Quran, the mom.
The mom, right? But this is something that you can discover because to be clean, to be respectful, to have a family, to have friendships, this is all Islam. But it's that part of Islam that you don't need to have a book. You just need to have a heart and a mind. And Americans also have a heart and a mind. And those parts of their culture are shared with any Islamic culture. So don't look down on any culture, and that way that'll help you adopt and keep those parts of our culture in America that are good, and reject those parts that are un-Islamic.
Okay, going down the American culture path, this again is another sensitive question, but it's a more high-level question than the one I asked. In American culture, during school years, I think it starts from about 3rd grade at least up to 8th grade. They teach you about family life education, which is a politer way of teaching kids about their bodies as well as functions that they're going to go, bodily changes that they're going to go through over the next few years. And they keep it age appropriate. So in 3rd grade, you're learning about your body in 3rd grade versus what you're learning about in 8th grade. They also make these classes gender specific. So again, it's not as if, just to avoid any embarrassment, I guess, to the kids who are going through these changes. How do you, if I'm a parent that doesn't want my child to go through this, because there is an option, you get that letter, and you can go to the public school building and they'll teach you what they're going to teach the child. So there's definitely a lot of communication from the schools to the parents. But it's still, if I feel that it's not right for my child to learn about these things because I feel it's inappropriate for their age, and I'm also worried that they're going to teach this un-Islamic point of view about alternative lifestyles and so forth. How do I explain that to my child?
So 2 points. Number one, it's always better to have that instruction in an Islamic environment. So wherever you have like a health class that's taught by a non-Muslim, it's always better to have that in an Islamic environment because there's not just a neutral teaching. There's always certain expectations and values that are taught along with the health and the science and the biology. The second thing, though, is that sometimes Muslims think that these are embarrassing topics and our kids are too young, and so we don't want to share it. Right? Muslims should be comfortable communicating about important life stages in an age-appropriate way, but in an open way. So don't say that I'm going to not talk about drugs. I'm not going to talk about puberty, about growing older, or about changes that take place in a person's relationships and in a person's body as they age. Those are discussions that in a wholesome environment, right, families and Islamic communities should arrange. Sometimes we feel embarrassed to talk about certain things, but that embarrassment causes us to fall into much greater harm in the future. So if there is something that you're not sure about, if there's something that you don't know, then find somebody who is a trusted and a respected elder and talk to them about it. That might be your parent, it might be an uncle or an aunt, it might be a scholar, an alim, Maulana, somebody who you can trust, somebody who is an elder, but don't just go online and Google it, because you can't trust that answer. And don't say that I'm too embarrassed, I'm not going to ask, because that might be harmful. And for parents, I would say that make sure that you are making an effort to communicate to your children and don't just wait and say that, well, they'll figure it out on their own.
So a follow-on question for that, actually. Do you think that our Sunday schools should be offering something similar to this family?
Sunday schools should do that, but there are the greatest thing that a Sunday school can do is reinforce a good environment at home. Right? So Sunday school is where you have one day a week to come together and remind ourselves that we are a community. But whether it comes to Quran or to prayer or to these types of topics, if there isn't a wholesome communication in the family, then Sunday school is not going to replace that. But if it can supplement a open communication at home, then it would be able to help get that message across more effectively. But some conversations, they're meant to be in confidence. And we should respect, sorry to interrupt, to cut you off, but we should respect the privacy of our children. So parents, when you're talking to your children, respect their age, their privacy, and their questions. Don't scold them or give them the impression that their questions or their thoughts are not important.
So thank you for that beautiful answer, and that actually leads me to the next question that I've got in my hand. Thank you for all the questions that are being sent forward. I'm trying to get through all of them, and Aga's doing a great job answering them. But just to make the point of how respecting each other's questions and curiosity, and I'm not going to respect this person's identity because I'm just going to call out Simon Farrow on this one. Inaya has posted a question, which I think is a very beautiful question, and it shows that curiosity starts at all ages here. The question is, how did people get made by Allah, and how and who was the first human made?
There's different opinions among Islamic scholars about how human creation took place. What the Quran tells us is that Allah created the first human being with responsibility. So what made Adam and Hawa human and not animals is that they had intellect and they could choose right and wrong. So imagine, a child, right? A child, when they're first born, they don't have enough intellect to make good and bad choices. It's just kind of instinct that they need to feed, they need to eat, or they need to have food, they need to sleep. It's just instinct. But as you grow, you can start to see that a 1-year-old is different than a newborn. A 2-year-old is different than a 1-year-old. And they start to be able to develop a personality. And then they start to be able to think. And then they start to be able to make decisions, good or bad, right? Gradually. So similarly, we don't know exactly what the process of creation was. Some Muslims believe that evolution is wrong, and God created Adam and Hawa as people directly from mud. He sculpted them as people. Others say that no, God might have created them from an existing animal, but He changed that animal and made it into a human form, where it was now able to think. Neither of those opinions is necessarily right or wrong, because what the Quran says you have to believe is that God created Adam and Eve, Adam and Hawa, as the first people with human attributes, meaning that they're responsible for their actions. Now, what process did God use? Did He use mud from Africa or mud from Asia? It doesn't really matter. Did he use mud or did he create that from a pre-existing ape? Doesn't really matter. That's not the focus of the Quranic story. One of those answers is right. We might never find out. We might find out through science. We might find out by some other means. Maybe we'll never find out. But the important point from an Islamic question is the way that God created human responsibility and the human soul. And then he tied it to our body. That the Quran is not a book of biology. And the Quran is not a book of anthropology. Meaning it's not telling us just the physical part, it's telling us what's relevant to our salvation and our soul. And so both of those opinions are possible. If somebody tells you that evolution is wrong because the Quran is against evolution, that's not true. The Quran is not a book of biology. If somebody tells you the Quran proves evolution, that's also not true. Because the Quran is not telling you the physical. The Quran is telling you the spiritual.
Nicely answered. Thank you very much for that. So moving on to something else, again, that I want to bring up and make it relevant to what's going on nowadays on the news and everything with the Me Too movement and so forth. We've got a couple of questions here about hijab and about women being second-class citizens in Islam or in Pakistani culture. How do you answer the question of why you have to wear hijab? And answers like boys can't control themselves is not a valid reason, especially with the Me Too movement, because now the narrative that is correctly being said, it's not just it's not just the women here, right? It's not about us being in control, or us preventing something. You can't. Yes, you can lock your car for preventing a break-in, but cars still get broken in. I mean, that's one of the bad examples that they use out there. So, why is the hijab on women so heavily narrated by Maulanas and so forth? And how do we not be treated like second-class citizens?
So the way that Islam approaches the question of being a first-class or a second-class citizen is that our human worth does not depend on the role that we play on a physical level. Right? So somebody is rich, somebody is poor. A rich person can do a lot more with their money than a poor person, but they're both equally human. Somebody is strong and somebody is weak. Somebody has a high IQ, somebody has a low IQ. Somebody is a man, somebody is a woman. Right? Each of them can do different things. A man cannot become a mother and will never know what it means to be pregnant or to have children. A woman might not be able to do certain things that a man can do. Somebody who is physically strong as a woman might be able to do something that somebody who's physically weak as a man cannot do. Right? Everybody's created with different physical attributes. It has nothing to do with our human worth. And in the West, we are really given the false message that we are individuals. We're not individuals. We are members of communities. Right? If you're an individual, you're part of a family. You're part of a society. You're part of humanity. And whatever Allah has given you, man, woman, smart, strong, weak, healthy, unhealthy, rich, poor, it's meant to help you connect to your family, your society. It's a responsibility and not just a right. Does that make sense? So your humanity is to use what Allah has given you in a way that's productive, that's healthy for society. So don't just think of my right as an individual. Think of my responsibility as a member of something greater than myself. Right? And it's a different culture than a culture that emphasizes rights and emphasizes individuality. It's not that you're not an individual at all. You are. But you're an individual because you're part of something bigger than yourself. Right? You're part of a society, part of humanity. Now, why does Islam say that, for example, there are certain rights that men have, certain rights that women have, certain responsibilities in dress? It's not about just protecting yourself from other people. Right? If a woman is praying alone at home, alone, does she have to wear hijab or not? She does. Right? Nobody's watching. Right? Why? Because hijab is not about other people. It's about yourself. And you can try this. Right? There's actually studies that have been done. Put on a dirty, smelly pair of sweatpants and t-shirt. Right? Don't brush your teeth, don't comb your hair, and try to take a practice SAT. And then comb your hair, right? Put on elegant clothing, put on some cologne or some perfume, and take that same test. You know what? You're going to have different results because there's studies that have been done. How you dress affects not just how other people think of you, it affects how you think of yourself, how confident you are, how you feel. And so Islam says that we should dress in a certain way to bring out the best values. And Islam wants men and women not to think that their physical attributes are the most important part of their identity. And so it's given us, and Allah has done this in His wisdom, certain requirements of dress and certain requirements of interaction so that we can bring out those values in the way we act, the way we dress, the way we present ourselves, to ourselves as well as to other people. Now the exact details of that, that's something that if we believe in God, we believe that He must have factored in all of those attributes, some of which we don't even know, and I can't explain it or justify it. But we can see certain value system, right? So a culture of modesty and a culture of hijab, it does take away that pressure to try to be physically attractive, right? And it does take away that as a means of developing self-esteem or getting ahead. Is that a substitute for being modest in your heart? No. It's not a substitute. You can wear hijab and not be modest. You can dress Islamically as a man and not be modest. It's not a substitute, but it does help move in that direction of modesty. Because if I'm always thinking about, and I'm always around people who are thinking about physical attraction, it becomes more difficult to become modest. Example of that is material wealth. Right? If everybody around me is always talking about, you know, how they're going to buy a new car, buy a new phone, buy something bigger, better, newer, I can still be a non-materialist person, but it's harder. But if I'm around a circle of friends that's not always talking about new cars and new phones and new houses and luxuries, they're talking about other things, then it's easier for me not to be materialist. Doesn't substitute, but it makes it easier.
Okay, I'm gonna, because the namaz time's at 7:05, I'm gonna make this the last question before we open it up to the forum if there's any more questions out there. Thank you again. There's a lot of questions still here. We're going to try to get, I'll type those up and send them over to Hakan and hopefully post on our Instagram at, I want to say Shahe Najaf Crew. The answers will be there, or on Facebook. Our group's called Sense. Another shameless plug. Okay, on the same topic of parents and females feeling like second-class citizens, can you, how do we convince our parents to let us go away from home for a better opportunity, like college or a better job, and so forth? I mean, with globalization, it'd be ideal to be born in Virginia, live in Virginia, go to college in Virginia, and get a job in Virginia. But the world is a lot smaller now than it was 20, 30 years ago. So how do I convince my parents to allow me to take that opportunity and grow as a person?
Well, I think that the healthiest way to look at that is not that I want to try to convince my parents and get a strategy to convince my parents, but I want to try to communicate with my parents. Some parents are good at communicating with their kids, and some parents might not be, it might not be as easy for them, and so then you have to help develop positive communication. Right? Parents, sometimes you have to work with your kids because they're not comfortable expressing themselves openly and maturely. Sometimes children may have to help develop that culture with their parents. So you want to communicate. You want to try to express what your priorities are and then listen to your parents and see what their response and their priorities are. And the ideal situation we want is to get a solution that both the parents and the children are comfortable with and agree with. So I might come and say that, you know, I want to go on the West Coast and be completely free, and I want to go to school in Oregon because I like, you know, the
rain.
I like the rain. I like the college campus, or I like, you know, the Pacific Ocean. And
California's better.
Huh?
California's better.
I was going to say California. That would have been too obvious a choice, right? And then the parents might say that, no, I want you to live at home and I want you to commute to school. Right? Now, I don't want to try to convince my parents. And as a parent, I shouldn't say I just want to convince my kids. You know, so, well, can you come and tell my kids what they have to do, and they have to just listen to their parents. Right? When your children are adults, you want to try to communicate. When your parents are now still your parents, but you're an adult, you want to try to communicate both ways. It might be a compromise. It might be that they convince you. It might be that you convince them. But your goal is, how can I express myself, not through anger and frustration and yelling at them that you don't understand and you never let me do what I want to do, but communicate what you're actually thinking. And then listen to your parents and try to address their concerns. Some of their concerns may seem reasonable to you. Some of their concerns may not seem reasonable to you. But if they're reasonable to your parents and you respect your parents, right, then you will even listen to their concerns that you don't understand or that don't seem reasonable. And the goal is you want to try to both be comfortable with the decision, even if it's not your first choice or their first choice. So it's a perspective of communication and mutual respect and consensus. Not, it's my life and I choose. Because we're not just an individual, we're part of something larger than ourselves.
Thank you for that. So kids, the aim here is when you go home, make sure you start asking your parents when they come home from work. It's like, how was your day, Dad? Or if you're to your mom, how was your day at work, Mom? Not just, how was your day at school? It's a two-way thing. So just to wrap it up now, I want to open it up to the floor. If there's any questions, if you raise your hand, I will bring the mic over to you. Oh, right at the back. On my way.
So I guess this isn't like a typical Q&A question, but I was told that this event was going to be an event where we as young adults could talk about the kind of programming that we want to see here at the community center. And that hasn't happened at all yet, so I'm confused. Did I just get the wrong information? Is that happening later? What's going on with that?
I'll go if you don't mind, I can answer that. So we did introduce the group, the group's called Sense. We're trying to do community programming for a younger crowd. Everyone's invited to our events. We do have a plug on Facebook and Instagram. If you can give us feedback on there, as well as if you want to talk to one of us, we're open to ideas.
And Sense, I think, has just started, you know, with their programming. How long has it been? A few months now?
A couple of months, yes.
A few months. So it's still developing. So if you have ideas about what kind of programming you think would be useful and you're interested in, you can give that feedback and join in, inshallah, because they might also not just need suggestions, but people to come and roll up their sleeves and help with it.
Assalamu alaikum. I have a question regarding where it's like, if you look in the history, I got kind of confused reading about it, where the second Khalifa got married to Imam Ali's daughter. But if you look at the two sects, they differentiate on whether the marriage was happened or not. So if you can just dissect that.
It's a historical question. The best response to that was given by one of our ulama, Muhammad Hasan Najafi in Pakistan. He said, all Muslims, Sunni and Shia, have narrated that the Prophet, when different people came to marry, with a proposal to marry Lady Fatima, the Prophet said that you are too old and she should marry somebody who is closer to her in age, and she will make that decision herself. Right? So the daughter of Lady Fatima, of course, is younger than her mother. So how could she marry somebody that was too old for her mother and against her own wishes on both counts? Right? So if you look at those narrations are clearly falsified narrations, because, and I won't go into the detail here, but you can look at the narrations that claim that, and you can see that they're making a claim that there was a marriage with Lady Fatima's daughter, when the Prophet had said that that's not an appropriate age for the mother. Because in Islamic principles and according to the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, when a man or a woman wants to get married, right, the parents should have a say, but the child, when they've become an adult, they also have a say. And so that's not considered to be an authentic story according to the teachings of Ahlul Bayt. And logically, it doesn't make sense.
One quick question. We hear that Imam Mahdi Ajallah Ta'ala Project Sharif will do the intiqam. He'll avenge Imam Hussein's blood. Could you shed some light on it? How and when would he resurrect all 30,000 plus all those who oppressed and fought against Imam Hussein? Or is it the oppressors of this time? So I kind of have difficulty understanding this. If he's resurrecting them, what's the point? Is he trying to prove something? And if he's basically avenging with the oppressors of today, we know in Islam until your last breath you still have a opportunity to repent. So if he comes and even though today's oppressor did not kill Imam Hussein, how is that, could you shed some light on it?
Very good question, and it's both. Right? So the principle in Islam is that we don't believe that Imam Hussein's tragedy was just a tragedy of a few people. Right? That they gave their life for Islam. So their tragedy is now a tragedy of Islam. All kinds of justice are related to Imam Hussein. Political justice, economic justice, religious justice, because they gave their life for all of Islam. So when we say that Imam Mahdi alayhi salam is going to avenge Karbala, it means on all of those levels. When he stops economic exploitation, when he stops political oppression, when he stops any kind of injustice, that is the vengeance for Imam Hussein. So the 12th Imam will eliminate all of that injustice. That is the vengeance for Karbala, because Karbala was about all of those things. But also, there are certain things that Allah says that I'll wait until the Day of Judgment or the hereafter to do reward or punish. But certain sins and certain good deeds are so powerful that Allah says they have to have their result in this world, right? Just like, sometimes you have, a person that you want to reward for doing something good to you, you want to give that to them right away because you're really, really touched. And sometimes you can wait. It's not as big a deal. So those things that are a big deal, right? Sometimes Allah punishes you or rewards you right away. Sometimes, because in this physical world, there's other things that cause our life results. It might not have happened in this world. Right? For example, right? Let's say that I murder somebody for no reason, God forbid. That's a very grave crime. It has to be punished in this world. But let's say that I died before I was able to get justice, for some reason that God knows better. So He might resurrect me in this life, punish me, and then punish me in the hereafter. Because that's a grave crime, Allah wants it to be punished in this world and in the hereafter. Or a very good deed, a martyr for Islam, Allah wants them rewarded in this world and in the hereafter. So it's both.
Okay, so I know this is a very great conversation. 2 hours almost have passed by, and we also want Sulayman has to catch a flight, so I want to give everybody a chance to socialize with the Agha and ask a couple more questions while we can get some food. Again, thank you everyone for coming and asking all these intellectual questions.